So the team at Marvel Snap has teased that balance changes are on the way, and they've given a lot of clues for which cards and decks are going to be impacted. I know a lot of you out there are very frustrated with the Marvel Snap meta. You're seeing Shuri and Thanos decks everywhere, and they feel super powerful. And then you've got frustrating cards like Leech and Arrow, which feel like they can steal games. So we're going to talk about all those in this video because those seem certainly like the most prime targets for nerfs. But I also wanted to showcase some buffs that I'd like to see in Marvel Snap. I like when we bring up cards that haven't gotten played, cards that are just collecting dust in people's collections, seeing those get a buff and giving them a little extra edge would be nice as well. So we're going to talk about both the nerfs I think are likely and the buffs I'd like to see. So kicking things off, we got this teaser above me here from a dev in Discord that said Thanos and Shuri decks have both been more dominant than we'd like in the past few weeks. The patch we're releasing later this month has significant changes targeting both decks. So we know for sure that Thanos and Shuri decks are going to be impacted. Does that mean exactly the cards Thanos and Shuri are going to be impacted? Not necessarily. I've got a couple different options for each of these decks in this video. I'm not saying they're likely necessarily going to nerf 2 cards in any given deck. Depending on how significant those nerfs are, that may or may not be possible, but just recognizing some of the potential paths forward here. For instance, just bumping Shuri to 5 energy could be a sufficient nerf, because right now with these Shuri Red Skull decks, they have the perfect curve of Shuri on 4, Red Skull on 5, and Taskmaster on 6, or alternatively Shuri on 4, skip turn 5, She-Hulk Taskmaster on 6. So having Shuri at 4 energy in particular creates some really nice lines for this deck. And if you push Shuri to 5 and make her more about setting up, you know, a big turn 6 play instead, that's going to give the opponent a lot more counterplay and more opportunities to get under that with their own matching strong plays. So this would kind of move that deck towards demanding a stronger early game commitment from 1 to 4 and then a big payoff perhaps on 6, as opposed to now getting the kind of 2-turn payoff or the double payoff on turn 6 as it currently stands, thanks to Taskmaster. Now, here's the deal. I actually don't think this is the change that's going to be made necessarily. I think Shuri right now, from a flavor standpoint and from a design elegance standpoint, is really, really nice with Black Panther. And clearly those are cards that are designed to go together from a lore standpoint, Shuri and Black Panther. So you've got Shuri on 4 and Black Panther on 5. And that's the perfect pairing. We've also got the Shuri location that does the exact same effect as Shuri. So I don't think they're going to change the text necessarily on Shuri either. I thought about some things like, just give it +6 or +8, or give it power equal to its cost, right? There were a few alternatives if you wanted to go for a text change on Shuri as well. But I think the doubling feels too connected to various other things in the Black Panther universe, and from a flavor standpoint, not that that's necessarily a good reason to not change a card, but often one that devs do care about and value a lot. So I thought a cost change might be a little bit more fitting. Still awkward, unfortunately, with Black Panther from a curve standpoint. Now it's 5 and 5 instead of 4 and 5. So that said, I think they might not actually nerf Shuri herself, but some of the cards around Shuri instead that enable what Shuri can do. And a great example of that is Red Skull. Because I think Red Skull having such a high base power total and being able to be doubled to 30 is just a little bit too ridiculous, right? Shuri obviously scales with power, and if you lower Red Skull's power, you're thereby going to be lowering some of the impact of Shuri. Now, that only solves half of the problems we talked about, which is the Red Skull side of things. I also think She-Hulk is a pretty prime nerf target and has a lot of potential to be nerfed, both because of this deck, but also She-Hulk shows up in a lot of decks. So I could see She-Hulk also going down to something like 8 power as well. I'm not going to cover that in great detail in this video, but something like pulling Red Skull down and pulling She-Hulk down are both also possible solutions to the Shuri enabling problems. Now, as you can see here for this version of Red Skull, if you're going to pull his power down, you need to lessen his downside from his ongoing effect. Currently, his ongoing gives +2 power to enemy cards. I'd say let's move him down to 10 and give him +1 power instead. So this is actually more of a nerf than a leveling of his stats, because now he kind of is like a 5/6 if your opponent has a full location against him, as opposed to 7 power where he currently is, because he goes 15, loses 8 down to 7. So a little bit of a straight up nerf to Red Skull on top of the Shuri nerf, but frankly I think that's okay, and 10 just felt like the right number for this one. I had also seen some people toss around ideas where maybe he gains power based on empty spots, so like he starts at 8 and gains +2 for every empty spot that your opponent has, which would be a great fix in regards to Shuri and could help him stay at similar numerical values, or maybe he starts at 7 and gains +2, whatever number you choose. But I thought it was a little bit weird trying to write that out on the card. It was a little bit awkward. What is a spot? What is it? You know, we don't really have a word for that, I guess, right now in Marvel Snap, at least as far as I can remember. So it felt better to sticking to the reference of enemy cards, and this was a way to kind of work that in. But certainly some possibilities here. The real goal, of course, with this change would be to lower the power so that he doesn't double quite as scarily. 30 is so hard to outscale for most decks. I just can't get above 30. I think you could get above 20 more reasonably if Red Skull were doubled to 20 instead. A lot of decks can get to 20 and just go to toe with that power, which also, of course, would reduce Taskmaster later as well. So feels much more fair to me at 10, but this is definitely a card with a lot of different levers to pull and could be changed in a variety of ways. So this is just one, I think, of many potential possibilities, depending on how much complexity I think the devs are willing to introduce into the changes. So, of course, on the other side of that tease was Thanos. We had Shuri decks and Thanos decks, and we even got a little bit of a follow-up tease here, I think, in Discord from one of the designers on Marvel Snap. He reads, as a balance designer, I might tell the team over the weekend I found playing against Thanos frustrating because of the way Space Stone and Reality Stone made location variants feel one-sided. So this was just an example of a way that a developer might give feedback, but it felt so pointed and specific to 2 cards, and you know, it was obviously something that was top of mind for that example, that I thought, yeah, maybe Reality Stone and Space Stone are actually where they're going to go here to balance Thanos. So I thought about how could you do that? How could you reduce a little bit of that bad feeling or variance around these 2 parts of the Infinity Stones? And for Reality Stone, I thought it'd be nice if it happened next turn as opposed to immediately, because that basically gives your opponent a little bit more agency over it and insight into what your plan is. So, you know, right now with the Reality Stone, you can make a lot of spicy surprise plays on final turns, turning like an unplayable location that's like, you know, Death's Domain or something, and then flipping it on the last turn and adding a bunch of extra power there, or Bar with No Name, or, you know, taking Limbo and deleting it so that the game ends on turn 6 instead. That surprise factor for Reality Stone can be a huge impact. But if you remove that surprise factor and your opponent knows what your plans are, if they know, oh, okay, they're going to wipe Death's Domain next turn, so I can actually play to Death's Domain, right? I think a lot of that would help ease some of that frustration around the surprise value of Reality Stone. So making the effect a little bit more symmetrical from an information standpoint. And then for Space Stone, kind of doing the same thing. What if you also made that more symmetrical, like we see with the card Cloak, for instance, where that is a symmetrical effect where both people can move. So, you know, for instance, right now you can use Space Stone to move something into Sanctum Sanctorum, an unplayable space, and you can snipe Sanctum Sanctorum. And that's awesome, right? The opponent has the information, but they don't have the ability to match. But if both players could move from that spot, then the opponent could also move a card into Sanctum Sanctorum, and it would add a little bit more symmetry here to this effect. This would still retain some of the crazy lockjaw plays that are possible with Space Stone, removing him into a fresh location. So there would still be a lot of power bundled into this card, but it would certainly help even things out. In regards to some scenarios where the opponent has some of that same luxury to move things around and shift some power, and that might make your life awkward as the Thanos player as well. Now, would these 2 changes be exhaustive enough to nerf the Thanos deck? I don't know that I'm willing to go that far. These are both pretty subtle changes. They aren't changing like actual numerical values. You know, you could also just draw a card off of some of these stones if you really wanted to lower their power level. If these 2 are doing enough on their own, maybe they don't also need to draw cards. Clearly, that could limit the Thanos deck a little bit from cycling through all these free plays. So there are a lot of ways, again, to adjust this. There's literally 7 different cards as a part of Thanos that you could change numerical values on. You could make some of the stones cost 2. You could make them 0 power. You can change text. There's so many things you can change. Who knows what exactly is going to happen? But I thought since we got this little bit of a teaser in Discord, this was a good place to start from. You could also just revert Thanos' stats back to 8. That was a weird buff none of us really understood. This deck would be good even if he was 8, but it never hurts to lower some power. So that said, I think there are other pieces of the Thanos deck and puzzle to nerf that might also help lower the power level of this deck. And chief among them is Leech. This guy is so frustrating as a part of Thanos decks because the problem is he comes out so early, whether they're using the ramp Greenstone to play him on turn 4 or just choosing him into play early with a Quinjet into a Lockjaw and then summoning him on turn 3 and silencing off your entire hand so that you feel like Leech has just completely ruined your game plan. That sucks. And so many people are expressing frustration around that sort of game plan. So Leech, as a part of Thanos, really feels quite powerful. And hitting Leech would also, of course, lower the power level of the Thanos deck. And I think really Leech getting cheated out early is one of the most frustrating elements of that pattern. So as opposed to nerfing Leech himself, it might be possible to instead nerf Lockjaw or the what's the Greenstone? Can never remember the Time Stone. The Time Stone. You could also nerf the Time Stone so that it doesn't give extra energy necessarily. There's a few ways to limit those early leeches, or you could go straight to Leech himself. And I thought this change was reflective of what they did to Nakia back in the day. Nakia used to buff your entire hand +2, and that ended up being a little too good, so they made her affect only the 2 leftmost cards in your hand instead, which might be a nice change for Leech. So he still has some disruption value. He's still able to, you know, potentially kill win conditions and really ruin some game plans, but you also have the possibility to have extra cards to play. You still have things to do. There's a possibility your Galactus is on the right instead of on the left, and your game plan isn't completely disrupted. So introducing a little bit of doubt sometimes into the Leech effect makes the opponents less confident in how effective their Leech is going to be, which can change their snapping patterns a little bit, but also just gives you opportunity to straight up beat Leech as well because they missed your good targets. There's still a little bit of a bias towards Leech here being effective because often your high cost cards kind of filter their way down to the left hand side of your hands because you're playing out your small stuff early in the game and your big stuff is what's left behind and tends to move over. So he may still have, you know, some impact here. It's not like this would totally negate Leech's effect. He might still be useful, but could limit it at least a little. So the final card I wanted to discuss in detail here. So the final nerf target I wanted to discuss in detail here is Arrow, because we got a question in Discord, is Arrow on the watch list? And we got some big eyes. So apparently she is on the watch list, and I think probably the best card in Marvel Snap, just single-handedly wins games on her own, pulling cards into an irrelevant location so that the person can win the other 2 locations. I mean, literally almost every deck can toss Arrow in and probably feel happy about it. So a potential couple ways to handle Arrow. The one I've suggested here is that she only moves the first enemy card, so only moves 1 card. So she'd still be really good if your opponent's going for a big play potentially. But there's a little bit of counterplay because if the opponent has the opportunity to play something kind of maybe small and irrelevant first, then Arrow would move the small thing and not the gigantic thing. So punishes certain breeds of decks that are just all in on one really big powerful play. So could still disrupt things like Galactus, for instance. If the opponent's trying to play a big Galactus, she has that disruption potential. She can be sneaky good. I wanted to give her a little bit of power back since it's a pretty significant nerf. You know, instead of hitting 2 or 3 cards and completely shutting down a turn, she's much more easily countered, so she needs some power to compete, probably for a 5-cost card. So 8 felt fine to give her back 1 extra power here. And I think that would really limit Arrow, right? Because the counterplay exists. It gives the player playing against Arrow so much more feeling of control and agency over this as opposed to feeling completely helpless. There still might be moments where they don't have a good way to stop an Arrow and they just kind of have to hope, but other times they will have an Arrow that is meaningful. Now, I've seen some more subtle changes to Arrow proposed as well, things where, for instance, she moves cards in order, and she'll still move, you know, multiple cards, but if they moved in order of play as opposed to randomly, because right now she just selects a random card to move first. The order is just a toss-up. So what that means is, you know, if you have like 1 open spot and you're trying to hope like a small card is moved into that open spot and your big card is not pulled by the Arrow, it's just a 50-50 toss-up. She might grab your big card instead. But if they had a kind of a silent change to Arrow where she pulled things in play order, that would also introduce a little bit of extra agency for the players, so you could play your small thing first, know that Arrow's going to pull that, and even if she would normally move 2 things, in certain scenarios that will limit her impact. She'd still be just as impactful if there are more open spots, of course, but moments that could change there. And I think that's a cool change. That's nice, but it's one that's maybe a little bit more awkward to word and put into the text of a card, and feels a little bit more like a silent change. So I went for something more deliberate and just ultimately more impactful, limiting her to the first card as opposed to an order-based change. Felt more relevant to me because I think Arrow's just been a little too good for a little too long. But certainly, again, multiple possibilities here on how to impact Arrow. So I wanted to acknowledge some of the other cards I've kind of talked about throughout this. I wanted to just kind of focus on 5 for the sake of discussion, but I think all 4 of these cards are also possible nerf targets. Sunspot is just ubiquitous as a 1-cost card. He is in so many decks. He is incredibly popular, and often that's something that devs will look at as a reason to balance change. I actually don't hate Sunspot that much personally. I kind of think he's fine. He's easily answered as a 1-drop with Killmonger, even an Electra or whatever, sometimes a Shang-Chi. So I actually think he's okay. I wouldn't touch Sunspot myself, but definitely feels like the kind of card that could be on a list. And then Lockjaw and Quinjet are, of course, both great enablers for Thanos. I actually hope Quinjet does not get nerfed. I like Quinjet as he is, but maybe his interaction making these stones cost 0 could just be another silent change. Maybe those could just cost 1. There's already a little bit of confusion there around the wording. So Quinjet could get kind of a pseudo nerf, silent nerf, but hopefully still functions the same for every other deck he's in, which he feels pretty cool in. Lockjaw is a really, really powerful card and kind of scary. Might be the kind of thing that needs to get nerfed. Maybe just push to 4 energy or something so that he comes down a little bit later. And then She-Hulk is another card that is just everywhere in the meta and super pervasive like Sunspot, and also a really big enabler for Shuri decks. So between being super good in Shuri and showing up in so many other lists, definitely feels like a card that could lose some power. Maybe making it something like a 6/8 instead might be right for She-Hulk. So yeah, these are definitely possibilities, and I'm sure there's even a few other cards you can think of as well that might actually be balance change targets. Now, that said, I wanted to move on to some buffs as well. I think this is the fun stuff. I want to see some cards at the bottom of the meta pulled up, because we have all of these cards just sitting in our collections never getting played, and sometimes nerfs can create space for cards to get more play, but I think these cards are so far behind the curve right now that they'll absolutely never get played. And in particular, we saw this teaser in Discord about 1 and 2 drops. A Marvel Snap dev wrote, there's plenty of room to improve. We have some solutions we like, and you'll hear more about them soon. So in other words, increasing the number of viable 1 and 2 drops is kind of what was suggested here. So I went and looked at the data for the worst cards in Marvel Snap. Angel was right there at the bottom, and a 1-drop, of course. So I thought, how can we help Angel? Well, this is a change a lot of people have requested for M'Baku and Angel both, so they could perhaps both benefit from this change. But what if Angel came out of your hand or your deck? Currently only your deck, which means if you draw him, he feels really bad to play. So what if you could just keep him in hand and he would still jump out as well from your hand? It wouldn't be that significant of a change. It would basically save you 1 energy. It wouldn't change anything from a resource advantage conversation. It's not like you'd be getting a free card. You'd just be saving 1 energy. I think it's totally fine to get a bonus 1 energy 2 power card, and it just makes Angel feel a lot better since you don't have to spend that energy to play him. Frankly, I still don't know if that'd be enough to make him good. Like, that's not that exciting because he still is a card you have to draw. He's still taking up that resource spot in hand. So I don't even know if this would be enough, but it certainly feels like a freebie that wouldn't hurt. And the same could be said for M'Baku as well. M'Baku's getting played a little bit more in some like Thanos decks with Lockjaw stuff. I think that's kind of a meme, but I think M'Baku could receive the exact same treatment here for Angel, where they work in either case. And you're probably just still thinking those cards are okay at best. I don't even think they'd be great because of this. So nice freebie change that would add some real quality of life to these cards. And then next up, another 1-drop that's near the bottom of the win rate stats is Hawkeye. He is normally a 1/1 that gets bigger when you play a card here the following turn. which is nice because you have control over it, right? You can make him a 1/3 if you're committed to your lines. But, you know, that kind of shows your hand to your opponent. It really limits your options. It can be a little bit frustrating in the late game if you like find him on turn 6 or something, right? So there's a lot of downsides and limitations to Hawkeye. But I thought, okay, what if you actually buffed his base power a little bit, so he's on parity with the average 1-cost card as a 1/2, and then you flip the script and you said, hey, what if instead we use this to maybe discourage our opponents a little bit? What if we said, hey, I'm going to play this down. I'm going to get a normal 1-cost card value out of it off the bat. And then I'm also going to perhaps discourage you from playing a card where you say, hey, yeah, you can play here, but you're going to give my Hawkeye a little bit of a power buff. And if they do, then you get a really nice 1-cost card. A 1/4, of course, as a +2 power is way above curve for a 1 power card. And that's awesome if it works. But it also has this little bit of mind games element, and you know, you could even do this with like a Spider-Man or something, where you play Hawkeye to discourage them from playing, and then you play a Spider-Man and you like lock down a lane, right? Or, you know, if you know a lane's going to be heavily contested on turn 6 or something, you could still play Hawkeye down on turn 5 and be like, yeah, okay, go for it. Let's see, let's engage in this race a little bit. So yes, you lose the ability to push this up yourself, but you gain some like mind games, some utility. You have the base power here anyway that's a little bit more compelling. So I don't know. I don't actually know that this card would be so much better. Again, I don't think this would make the card insane or anything, but to me it feels a lot more interesting. It also kind of seems like it captures the flavor of Hawkeye better. Like, I'm laying down this cover fire. If you play here, my arrows are going to rain down on you, sort of thing. I'm going to get more powerful. So I like this design better. I'm not even sure from a power level standpoint. His power could maybe still be higher ultimately, but this is more intriguing, more mind games. He feels a little bit more in the vein of Marvel Snap to me. So I would like this version much better personally. So a couple other cards I wanted to look at here were the January release cards into Series 5, Shauna and Shadow King, and I almost even put Dazzler in here as well. But man, the power level on those are all really low. Their win rates are abysmal. And of course, you know, you might be thinking, well, who cares? Nobody has these cards anyway. They're Series 5 cards. Like, why do we need Shauna and Shadow King buffed? And I hear that. That's a reasonable thing to ask. But the other side of that is that somebody opened Shadow King and Shauna in a reserve as their super ultra rare, super lucky grab for a Series 5 card, and they got Shadow King instead of Galactus or Thanos or something awesome, right? In other words, I don't think you can have these ultra rare cards being this terrible. Should they be meta dominant? No, probably not, right? That creates some real pay to win concerns. Should they be competitive and interesting? And should you feel like, oh yeah, okay, this should be a worthwhile card? I think so, right? And they're also just eventually going to drop down in series and be cards that people are opening. So anyway, I think these cards came out at 4 energy because they came alongside Zabu. And I think they were building this kind of like Zabu train of releases. You get Zabu in the season pass, and we're going to give you some 4-cost cards to play with your Zabu, right? But ultimately, they were just way weaker than other 4-cost cards we've seen, you know, Darkhawks, etc. So I wondered if these were balanced a little bit around the fact that they just made them 4, and they could have just made Shauna 3-cost. Why not make her 3? She's really bad at 4. And I know you might be thinking, wait, that's a lot of stats for a 3-cost card because you're getting 4 1-drops and she's 2 power. And I hear you, it is, but it's honestly sometimes a downside more than an upside. If you've ever played Shauna, you'll kind of know this, because she's locking out so much of your available board space that she can become a real limiter. And it's often really hard to squeeze her into a spot herself. She takes up 2 because she's playing a 1-cost card with her. And she can also low roll with things like, you know, Ebony Maw can completely lock you out. So there's a real trade-off here. Yes, you're getting some power efficiency, but you're also getting board inefficiency and risk introduced that makes Shauna a real limiter. So I don't actually think she'd be that crazy as a 3-cost card. Maybe she could be like a 3/1 or something. Maybe she summons at other locations instead of summoning an extra 1 cost at her location if you're worried about total power output. But after having played this card sometimes, I think she feels so awkward sometimes that I'm not sure she'd be that scary at 3. Maybe you need to hedge a little bit if you lower her cost, but I don't think too much. and it would certainly help make this card feel more viable. And then basically the exact same treatment for Shadow King here. This card is so bad. He is absolutely abysmal when you look at the data. Like, his played and drawn win rates are just garbage because there are so few scenarios where he's actually any good. Like, yeah, okay, I can push that Red Skull from 30 back to 15, but then I spent 4 energy and I still have to face off against a 15 power Red Skull, right? Whereas, a Shang-Chi just kills it, right? So I think he needs kind of a power premium at his current power level. So he's just so far off the mark. You got to do something to fix this card. I think you could maybe even do something like make him like a 5 or a 6 power card that affected all locations as opposed to just cards at his location. That might be a little too crazy, but could be a different direction to take the card, like power spike him up and increase his cost to match. It's a much easier and obvious change to just lower his costs and hope that does enough. But I don't even know if this would be enough to make Shadow King good. Now, this said, right, there are so many other cards to potentially buff. There are probably like 20 cards you could choose to pick for buffs currently in Marvel Snap and have their power level jump up a little bit, and it would not be absurd. So, I could just keep going with this, but I just wanted to toss it to you guys. Which cards would you like to see buffed? What would you like to get a power here or there? Which effect do you think could be changed in a way to make the card a little bit more compelling? I'm curious, which cards do you just want to see playing more because you like their characters? For instance, I think it's a shame that cards like the Hulk don't really get played all that much because he's just a 12 power base effect. I mean, can we do something to make the Hulk more interesting, or the Thing? I know they're the big strong guys, they're no ability cards, but they just kind of get left out most of the time. So what's your buff targets? What stuff would you like to see? I am very curious to hear those. And also, of course, curious to hear your thoughts on which cards you think deserve nerfs, which decks you'd like to see changed, or any additional thoughts here on the potential nerfs and buffs coming to Marvel Snap in the nearish future. That said, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.